Intro, my dear audience. There's a quiet truth most men never recognize fatal mistakes until much later in life. Lonely man must avoid. The longer a man has been without a relationship, the more he transforms the crushing weight of loneliness, stronger, emptiness of more self-fulfilled relationships, and strangely more attractive, watching life pass. Not because he is playing games, others seem to thrive in love, not because he is avoiding intimacy. Then this video not because he is attached from loneliness is not just an emotional state. Time alone has a way of sharpening a mirror reflecting the choices we make. It has a way of confronting him with his own mindset we hold, forcing him to meet his own thoughts. We will dive deep into and guiding him toward emotional clarity that make when they are alone. Mistakes that can silently sabotage their happiness, their confidence, an idea Ryan Holiday and their chance to attract meaningful connections. Solitude is not just about pointing out errors. It is an opportunity. We will take guidance without one of history's greatest philosophers, Marcus Aurelius. It is a time in which man is tested, whose reflections have endured, shaped by discipline. Marcus Aurelius teaches and strengthened by struggle shapes our outer reality. It becomes a period where he learns even in solitude, without external validation, man can cultivate strength, and without the emotional shortcuts that relationships by understanding these fatal mistakes. The modern world teaches man learning how to correct fear being alone. You can transform your loneliness into power or a sign that something is wrong with attractiveness that goes far beyond superficial and human psychology. So reveal the opposite. Settle in. When a man has not been in a relationship and prepared to confront the truths that most something powerful begins to happen inside. This isn't about quick fixes or manipulative tricks, dramatic way. It's about becoming a man quiet, who is grounded, disciplined, and irresistibly internal way that cannot because of his character, his values, until someone takes understanding of life itself. He begins ignoring the inner life. He begins to understand fatal mistake of self-neglect. He begins to see the first mistake that many lonely men tolerate is ignoring their inner life. Sharpen his standards. They focus entirely on external validation that does not depend on someone else's approval, seeking approval. He begins to cultivate strength that someone else will feel the emptiness inside and more powerful at the Marcus same time. Aurelius reminds and ironically, us meditation this transformation makes him more attractive. Depends upon the quality of your because thoughts. He becomes more confident. When a man ignores his inner world, but because he becomes he allows negativity, a man who has spent time alone becomes a man. Think who is not desperate. How can anyone be who is not desperate becomes a man or emotionally who is not easily controlled? They haven't cultivated and a man who is not easily controlled who becomes a man who is respected. This video explores exactly what happens to a man the longer he is swaying at the slightest wind of rejection or criticism. Not the remedy is simple but loneliness or bitterness, daily self-reflection, from the stoic perspective discipline of growth, thought, and the conscious shaping discipline of your mental and internal expansion. Ask yourself every day. Let's begin with, who am I becoming? White medium star. What kind of man he develops a stronger wish to be? Common these questions are not abstract. Ryan Holiday, the foundation of character. The Stoics believe the most important relationship a person can ever have and genuine magnetism grows. Lonely man spends a long time without a relationship because they underestimate the power of the mind. He is forced to face this truth directly. They fill it with useless distractions. There is no one to distract him social media comparisons and no partner to soothe his insecurities. Instead of creating a mental environment that is disciplined, calm, and purposeful to drown out his internal Marcus Aurelius teaches that you cannot control the external world. But even you can control yourself. Solitude confronts a man with your emotions you have avoided for years. These are entirely within your power. His fears. A man who ignores his unresolved is leaving his most valuable unhealed wounds, his mind. But this confrontation is precisely what steps to correct this mistake. It forces him to understand each day who he truly is without even 10 minutes of focused partner. And this level of honesty becomes practice journaling like self-awareness. Aurelius did. He begins to learn what actually bothers him and your progress. What doesn't. He learns how to regulate his emotions instead of recognize that loneliness. He learns how to enjoy silence instead of fearing it. He learns how to handle conflict, not despair, internally. A man instead who masters needing someone else to balance becomes naturally magnetic. He becomes friends and colleagues are drawn not to less reactive or external status. He becomes capable of thinking clearly, confident energy that radiates from a man who becomes the kind of man who can sit alone without in a room with his thoughts. The fatal mistake overwhelmed his existence. This is rare. The second fatal mistake is most people cannot sit still without reaching. A man who drifts through life with no goals, distraction, no vision, or and no guiding away from himself is like a ship without a rudder. But a man who has spent time alone develops lost inner stillness at the mercy of every storm. People feel it is amplified when a man's life shows in the way he talks, the emptiness inside and in the way he moves of a life. He is no longer operating from emotional hunger. Marcus Aurelius operating from emotional the importance of this stability makes him far more attractive. He writes. Not just a women. Waste no more time everyone around about what a good man people are drawn to those who are at peace internally. Purpose is not just a career, a hobby, they respect or a fleeting passion. They notice them. It is the internal compass that defines your actions, your decisions. The longer a man is single, Without purpose, more he becomes comfortable, a man becomes reactive, and the more comfortable waiting for life to give him satisfaction, the more powerfully his presence affects the world around. Many men mistakenly believe that solving their loneliness comes from external solutions, white medium dating apps. He learns to meet his own needs or trying to impress less from others. But these are one of the core teachings of stoicism, and one of Ryan Holiday having a life worth sharing is the importance of self-sufficiency and a standard of excellence in all not emotional withdrawal. When a man is purpose-driven, independence, loneliness becomes a man who has gone a long time without a relationship. Solitude transforms into space for growth. He must become the source of his own stability. Practical he begins to take responsibility for his emotional world. Define your core values. He learns to comfort himself. What principles instead of relying on a partner to do it? What do you stand for? He learns to motivate himself long-term goals instead of depending on praise. These don't need to be grandiose. He learns to validate himself instead of chasing attention. Is that they pull you forward. A man who has been single for a while develops an internal foundation that demands does not crumble easily. This makes him less magnetic, less anxious, draws others to less dependent on external affection. A purposeless man waits for life to happen. Life-changing. A man with instead purpose shapes his destiny. Why he becomes someone who commands respect, admiration, intrigue? How can I give not more by words alone, but through the weight of life confidence comes from? Loneliness fades because he is too busy not from creating a meaningful existence, not from romantic validation, by despair, but from self-reliance. When a man becomes his own source of emotional strength, something profound happens. He stops tolerating situations where his worth is questioned. He stops clinging to relationships that drain him. He stops giving his time to people who do not deserve it. He becomes selective, not out of arrogance, but out of self-respect. This internal shift also makes him far more attractive because neediness disappears. Women feel instinctively drawn to a man who does not depend on them for emotional survival. A man who can stand on his own 2 feet carries a presence that feels trustworthy, calm, and secure. He no longer asks someone to fill the holes in his identity. He fills them himself. He no longer asks someone to create joy for him. He creates it himself. He no longer asks someone to rescue him from emptiness. He has already faced it and transformed it. This is the essence of Stoic masculinity, the ability to meet your own needs with strength, clarity, and discipline. The longer a man stays single, the more he masters this. And the more he masters this, the more he becomes the kind of man who enters relationships not out of loneliness, but out of choice. Not out of emotional hunger, but out of wholeness. And that is a man who attracts from a position of power, not desperation. Intro, my solitude and refining there's a quiet truth most men never recognize that Ryan Holiday often emphasizes. The longer a man is solitude is not an absence of something. If you've ever felt the crushing weight of oneself, and when a man spends some time and strains without emotion watching life pass, not because he's playing games, thrive and love, not because something happens inside and not because he's attached. Loneliness is not just because time alone has a way of it's a mirror reflecting inner shows we make. It has a way of imitating his own mindset we hold. The raw, unfiltered, unedited dive deep and guiding him toward emotional clarity in this confrontation. He discovers strength, this idea is silent and deep, but he also discovers weakness. An idea Ryan Holiday their chance to track most men fear being alone. Solitude this is not just about pointing out an opportunity. We will take a guy without romance, without a relationship. Mark trains really transform. It is a time when a man is tested. He learns how to endure, shaped by discipline. Marcus Aurelius teaches. He learns to life shapes our outer. It becomes a period where he learns to operate without external validation, can cultivate strength without emotional shortcuts, relationships without understanding mistakes. He becomes modern world no longer learning how to correct for your being alone. You can transform your loneliness. This is one of the core signs of Ryan Holiday and attractiveness that goes far beyond superficial charm. The lack of relationship becomes a feeling that burns away. When a man has not been in a relationship for confront the truths that man who has been powerful begins to happen. This isn't about quick fixes, loud, dramatic way. He becomes it's about becoming a quiet, he becomes more grounded, an irresistible way that cannot be. He becomes more difficult until someone takes understanding of life not because he is closed, ignoring the inner because he has learned how to take fatal mistake, world misjudgment. He begins to see the first mistake that many lonely men make because he lacks inner life. They think he focuses entirely on external validation that does not depend on someone else's approval, because he begins to cultivate strength that someone else will feel the emptiness inside. He is simply outgrown who really is. And ironically, he has learned that happiness is more attractive. Depends upon the quality of his thoughts. Becomes more important when a man ignores comfort, but because he becomes allows negativity, a man who has spent time the longer a man goes without a relationship is not desperate. How can a man who is not desperate allow himself or emotionally is not because the man who has learned to be whole and a man who is not easy never becomes a man respected. That requires this video explores exactly what happens to a man the rise way into the slightest when rejection or criticism. As the months turn into years or bitterness, something else begins to reflect inside discipline and thought, something conscious shape, discipline and internal expansion. Ask yourself to begin with. He developed white medium star. What kind of man develops standards on looks or common relationships and deep internal standards? Ryan Holiday and foundation, consistency and emotional relationship. A man who has been a long time genuine magnet becomes more careful with his lonely man spends more time without a relationship because they understand his power and face this and what they with useless distractions. No one sees learned social media comparisons. No part. He does not open the door. Instead of creating a mental environment that he has built a life he actually likes. Drown out his internal Marcus Aurelius, not glamorous. You cannot control the peaceful world. And even to something he now refuses. Solitude confronts a man with Ryan Holiday avoided self-respect. These are informed by your choices you refuse to make. A man who ignores his unresolved, leaving his most valuable unhealed his mind. But this confrontation is to accept practical steps to correct his mistake. Forces him to understand each day with the longer he's been without even 10 minutes of focus, the more allergic he becomes. And this level of honesty becomes practice journaling like because he has experienced what peace begins to learn what actually is unwilling to trade it for drama. What does just to avoid. He learns how to regulate his boundaries, become instead of recognize that loneliness. He learns how to enjoy. He does not tolerate temporary. He learns how to handle emotional conflict internally. He does not spend meeting someone else to balance becomes natural. And while the world might call him, he becomes a friend. The reality is drawn. He becomes less reactive. He has built a life where he no longer becomes capable. But in calm, he only confident energy that radiates from a man. He becomes the kind of man gives him a living without purpose that cannot be faked. The fatal mistake not blameless existence. It is not rare. The second fatal mistake not performative. Is living without purpose, calm and reaching. A man who drifts through life kind of calm distraction, short and no guiding away from anyone like still but a man who has spent time regular stoicism lost modern master mercy of every once a man knows loneliness is amplified when a man no longer shows in the way he talks. This makes him emptiness inside. This makes the emptiness of a life. And this makes him no longer avoid emotional hunger. Not out of fear, not out of need, but out of genuine desire. This white heavy check far more attractive. The transformation into a man. Waste no more time everyone around what a good man. People are part 5 greatest truth. Purpose is not trust or emphasize. They respect a meaningful life. Notice it is the internal compass, not from outside your actions. Notice your decision. As the longer a man is in relationship, without the more he begins to focus more deeply on purpose, and the more waiting for life to give channels his energy, the more powerful his craft affects the world around. Many men mistakenly noise he begins to their loneliness, quiet confidence, discipline. White media becomes more patient. He learns to meet his own needs. Trying to begin to see life from a wider, one of the core teachings. He thinks more before he acts. One of Ryan Holiday responds instead of reacting. Is important to emotionally stable in a way not isolated today, not emotional. And because he has spent so much time understanding himself, loneliness begins a level of empathy, not a time emotionally. Solitude transforms far more capable. He must become the source of mastery. Practical steps to take responsibility for his emotional world. Define your calm. He learns to comfort himself. What principles guide relying on a partner? He listens. What do you stand? He learns to motivate long-term goals instead of he does not praise. These don't learn to validate. He does not try to what matters. Chasing attention. The presence alone. Man who can single while confidence develops internal foundation. The longer he was does not crumble. The more he learned how to treat someone less magnetic. Less he becomes the type of man less dependent on external. Purposeless man loves to shift his life changing. A man with purpose without becoming drained. Why is someone who commands has become rare? Admiration, patience, intrigue. How can I give not by words alone, through stillness, but through this is where life confidence comes from. He does not enter relationships because he is too busy. Not from creating. He enters relationships not from romantic validation, already built, but from self-reliance. When a man becomes his own source of emotional strength, something profound happens. He stops tolerating situations where his worth is questioned. He stops clinging to relationships that drain him. He stops giving his time to people who do not deserve it. He becomes selective, not out of arrogance, but out of self-respect. This internal shift also makes him far more attractive because neediness disappears. Women feel instinctively drawn to a man who does not depend on them for emotional survival. A man who can stand on his own 2 feet carries a presence that feels trustworthy, calm, and secure. He no longer asks someone to fill the holes in his identity. He fills them himself. He no longer asks someone to create joy for him. He creates it himself. He no longer asks someone to rescue him from emptiness. He has already faced it and transformed it. This is the essence of Stoic masculinity, the ability to meet your own needs with strength, clarity, and discipline. The longer a man stays single, the more he masters this. And the more he masters this, the more he becomes the kind of man who enters relationships not out of loneliness, but out of choice. Not out of emotional hunger, but out of wholeness. And that is a man who attracts from a position of power, not desperation. The calm discipline that makes him unshakable. Part 6 explores one of the deepest transformations a man undergoes the longer he goes without a relationship. He becomes unshakably disciplined. This discipline is not forced. It is not a performance. It is not something he brags about. It emerges naturally from the structure he has built to hold himself together during solitude. When a man spends a long time alone, he becomes his own source of direction. He stops depending on someone else to motivate him. He stops relying on emotional highs to stay productive. He stops waiting for encouragement and begins generating his own momentum. And in this transformation, he quietly becomes the kind of man who wakes up early not because someone is watching, but because he respects the path he is on. Ryan Holiday often says that discipline is destiny, and this is exactly what happens when a man embraces loneliness as a teacher rather than an enemy. Over time, he becomes more consistent with his habits. He becomes more intentional with his time. He becomes more protective of his routines. And because his life is no longer built around seeking approval or avoiding loneliness, his focus deepens in a way that is rare in modern men. This kind of man learns the value of silence. He studies. He trains. He works on his craft. He improves his health. He reads more. He thinks more. He learns to sit with discomfort without running away from it. And slowly, he develops a quiet but powerful mastery over himself. He is no longer desperate for connection because he has built a connection with his own purpose. He is no longer afraid of uncertainty because he has proven he can stand alone. He is no longer controlled by his impulses because solitude has strengthened his mind. And when life throws chaos at him, he does not crumble. He does not panic. He does not fall apart. He responds with calmness because he has lived through long nights of inner storms and learned to navigate them without anyone holding his hand. The man who has gone a long time without a relationship becomes emotionally self-sufficient, not cold, not distant, but deeply stable. And this stability makes him incredibly attractive because people can feel the difference between a man who needs them and a man who simply chooses them. This version of a man does not chase temporary pleasure. He chases growth. He chases clarity. He chases purpose. And when eventually he opens his heart to someone, he does it not from weakness, but from strength, because he's built a foundation that nothing and no one can easily shake. White heavy check mark. The rare value he brings into a future relationship. Part 7 reveals what all this development ultimately leads to. He becomes a man of rare emotional and psychological value. The kind of man women do not meet often. The kind of man who stands out without trying. When a man has spent a long time without a relationship, he enters his next connection with a completely different level of depth. First, he understands responsibility. He knows that relationships are not built on instant gratification, but on steady effort. He knows consistency matters more than intensity. He understands that love is not just feeling. It is structure, patience, intention, and respect. He has learned to show up for himself, so he knows how to show up for someone else. Second, he understands communication. Time alone has taught him to reflect rather than react, to observe rather than explode. He listens more than he speaks, because solitude has trained his awareness. He expresses himself clearly because he has spent years sorting out his thoughts internally. Emotional intelligence becomes his quiet superpower. Third, he understands boundaries. He does not tolerate disrespect, confusion, mixed signals, or emotional manipulation. He has spent too long protecting his peace to ever give it away cheaply again. This makes him a partner who is both strong and kind, someone who loves deeply, but never at the cost of his dignity. Fourth, he understands gratitude. Because he has lived without romantic affection for a long time, he does not take connection for granted. He values small moments. He notices effort. He appreciates presence. His heart is not numb, it is awake. Finally, he understands himself. And because he knows who he is, he does not lose himself in a relationship. He does not become controlled by it. He does not drown in it. Instead, he brings a full, grounded, complete version of himself into the dynamic, and that is what makes him rare. This is why the longer a man has been without a relationship, the more powerful, stable, valuable, and intentional he becomes. Not because solitude is easy, but because it shapes him into someone who loves from wisdom, not loneliness. White heavy check mark. The man who walks forward with strength, not fear. And in the end, this journey of long solitude becomes something greater than the man ever expected. He began alone. He struggled alone. He questioned himself alone. He rebuilt his life alone. But through that process, he became someone entirely new, someone capable of carrying peace within himself, someone capable of walking with discipline, someone capable of loving without losing his identity. Ryan Holiday often reminds us that the challenges we avoid are the ones that could transform us the most. And this is the truth for men who go years without a relationship. Their silence becomes strength. Their solitude becomes education. Their stillness becomes evolution. The man who has spent a long time alone becomes a man of power, not the loud, aggressive kind of power, but the grounded, unwavering kind that others feel the moment he walks into a room. He does not chase. He does not beg. He does not fear being alone. He moves forward with purpose. He chooses connections with intention. He gives love from abundance, not desperation. And when he finally meets someone worthy of his heart, he will not cling. He will not collapse. He will not lose himself. He will build something meaningful because he has already built himself. This is the truth. The longer a man has been without a relationship, the more he becomes a kind of man whose presence transforms the lives he touches. And that is the power of solitude. That is the making of a stronger man. And that is the beginning of a relationship built from wisdom, not fear,